So my name is Jenica Liberator. I'm the program coordinator for education and outreach at the LGBTQ Center in South Bend, Indiana. And tonight we're just going to have a panel discussion about the potentially happen if it is passed. It's going to introduce everybody real quick and read their bios. And then we'll get into a presentation from Megan about what the Equality Act is. And then there is the opportunity for questions after that. So if you have any questions, please drop them into the comment section under the video streaming on Facebook. So first we have Diana Moya joining us. Diana is from the South Bend Human Rights Commission. She's the South Bend Human Rights Commission 2004 and served in the intake as the intake officer and investigator, and then in 2017 she took over. We also have Kit Malone, Indiana. Kit works closely with the entire spectrum of ACLU issue areas in campaigns. She also oversees the ACLU of Indiana. The ACLU of Indiana, Kit has been a leader in the effort to beat numerous legislative attacks on the rights of queer and choosers. In 2019 for her work, and in 2020 was named Community Leader of the Year by the Indy Rainbow Chamber of Commerce. In 2021, she won the Kennedy King Memorial Initiative's Trailblazer Award for Civic Engagement. A former high school teacher, Kit started advocacy career as a community organizer for the Freedom Indiana campaign. While there, she helped organize actions in OL communities. Kit was instrumental in the development of Indy Pride's annual trans-focused event, #TransGlam, and co-organized the first transgender marching contingent in the Indy Pride Parade's history. Kit currently also serves as a member of Indy's Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network. So welcome, Kit. And then we also have Megan Robertson. She's a campaign strategist who has been active in political issues, including mass transit, and LGBTQ rights. Prior to starting Frontrunner Strategies, Robertson served as the campaign manager for Freedom Indiana, a statewide bipartisan coalition that derailed unions as its supporters sought to pass it through the state legislature to send it to ballot referendum. She also served as campaign manager for Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard's successful re-election campaign and ran numerous congressional, state, and local campaigns. In 2014, Megan was a fan of the Chicago Bears and Cubs. She serves on the board of directors for the Damien Center and Foster Success. And her wife, she and her wife, Katie, live in Indianapolis with 3 rescue dogs. So welcome, Megan. So again, if anybody has any questions as we're doing some of the presentations tonight, just drop them in the chat. Brief presentation on what the basics of what the Equality Act actually is. So go ahead, Meg.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for having me. And I know Jenica was breaking up a little bit, so we'll probably summarize ourselves a little bit, but I think you all got some of the most important parts, which is that I'm an avid fan of the Chicago Cubs and Bears. And then I live with my wife, Katie, with our dogs. But I've spent a lot of time working on LGBTQ rights issues, ran Freedom Indiana the first time around, call it 1.0, when we were trying to stop a ban on same-sex marriage, and have been active in issue advocacy and politics For almost 20 years now. And I'm really excited to be working with a group called Freedom for All Americans in support of the Equality Act. And so I'll kick us off with a little presentation to talk through what the Equality Act is, what it will mean for the community, and see if we can't answer some basic questions before we jump into the panel. So I'm going to share my screen here. And start the presentation. Can everybody see this? All right, Zoom participants, thank you. So the Equality Act essentially is a law that will pass LGBTQ non-discrimination protections at the national level. So what is the Equality Act? Federal bill. If it's passed, it will provide comprehensive LGBTQ non-discrimination protections in employment, housing, and public accommodations. And it will also update the civil rights protections for all protected classes. If you think about when the Civil Rights Act was passed, it was a very long time ago. We're talking about in the late 60s. So some of the language in there is language that probably made a lot of sense at the time, but perhaps could be said a little bit differently and more fully encompass really what the law is trying to accomplish. For example, if you think about, again, when the Civil Rights Act was put into law, there was talk specifically of lunch counters and things of that nature, which completely made sense at the time. But now perhaps we can, again, say those things a little bit more clearly to make sure that people are protected in all places when they're not in their home, whether you're at work, whether you're in an establishment, just to make sure that everybody's protected the way that they need to be. So where is the Equality Act now? It is passed the House. As you can see, there's a nice little vote tally there. Lots of Democrat support, a few Republicans, and right now is sitting in the Senate waiting to be voted on. There was a hearing on it. I believe it was in March or April. It was in the spring. But outside of that, there hasn't been any movement. We're really kind of waiting for the folks in the Senate to have conversations and hopefully bring this really important bill for a vote soon. Obviously, we've seen some bipartisan movement on some issues like the infrastructure bill and others. And we're hoping that the Equality Act can be an issue where both Republicans and Democrats can come together and say this is something important that we can work on together to make progress for a lot of people. Now, what about the Bostock case? Some of you may have heard this. The Supreme Court recently ruled in Bostock versus Clayton that employment discrimination against LGBTQ people is sex discrimination and therefore is prohibited by the Civil Rights Act. And that's wonderful. What we would do with the Equality Act is actually codify that decision by listing sexual orientation and gender identity very clearly in federal law. To clarify this, because again, right now, this is what the courts have ruled, and you know, we think appropriately so, but we want to make sure that this is enshrined in the law so that there's no question in the future, regardless of, you know, how the courts change. This is the law of the land and should remain the law of the land. So we want to make sure that that is put into law. So who gains protections under the Equality Act? 21 states and over 300 cities have passed LGBTQ non-discrimination protection. But 50% of LGBTQ people live in the 29 states that still don't have comprehensive statewide laws. Indiana is one of those states, as I'm sure many of you know. And there are lots of cities who have passed protections. Indianapolis has passed protections, you know, Evansville, lots of locations. But just because your city has passed protections doesn't mean you're protected as soon as you drive out of city boundaries. So, for example, somebody who lives in Evansville is protected in city limits, but once they leave city limits or in the rest of Vanderburgh County, all of a sudden you're not protected anymore. It's a patchwork system. Whether you're looking at the national level where some states have protections and some don't, or you're looking at the state level where some cities have protections and some don't. And that's not really how it should work. I've heard somebody say that it's like having your right to not be discriminated against sputter out like a cell phone service depending on where you're at, whether it works or not. Or as us Hoosiers would know, it's like having your time zone change based on driving across county lines. But it's with something that's really, really serious, like protections from discrimination, and it's not appropriate. So we want to fix that and make sure that everybody's covered wherever they live, work, and play. And then finally, well, I just already said that. Sorry, I lost my space, but essentially we want to make sure that people are protected no matter where they live. Support for the Equality Act. So the Equality Act has a lot of support across political parties, geography. A recent survey shows that 76% of Americans support enshrining these protections into the law. The bill's been endorsed by a large coalition, includes over 300 businesses, trade associations, advocacy organizations. Here in Indiana, we actually released a list of over 100 businesses that signed on in support. Everything from groups like, Eli Lilly, Cummins, Salesforce, Roche, and large companies to, smaller mom and pop shops that are restaurants that feel like it's really important to make sure that we are welcoming to everybody. Thousands of faith leaders across the country have endorsed this. Similarly, in Indiana, over 100 faith leaders have signed on and have signed on to a letter urging Congress to act on this. And right here, I can talk a little bit about how the Equality Act interacts with faith and religious exemptions. So first, freedom of faith, freedom of religion is fully protected by the First Amendment, and the Equality Act doesn't do anything to change that. It provides the same exemptions. Oops, sorry, I need to go back. There we go. It provides the same exemptions to religious organizations as the Constitution does, and the way that it treats civil rights laws with regard to other forms of discrimination. And clergy are protected. They're not going to be compelled to do things that do not match up with their faith, but at the same time, we need to make sure that folks are protected from discrimination, and there's no reason that we can't do both and do it very effectively. That's why all these faith leaders from across the country have signed on. And we've had, again, 100 faith leaders in Indiana sign on to it. So there's no conflict there. We should be able to do both. So how you can help, and I know we're going to go into a panel. I'm sure we'll talk about all of this a little bit more in detail, but we need you to reach out to your senators. I know Jenica has some things that everybody can do, but specifically, I really want to stress that we should reach out to both senators, but Senator Young is probably the most likely to be open to this, just simply because Senator Braun has already written an op-ed saying he's opposed to the Equality Act. That doesn't mean that we should let him off the hook. We should continue to have conversations with him, but we also should make sure that we focus on Senator Young as well. You can go to equalitytime.org to sign up for things, but also, again, I know there's a lot of local efforts, and we don't want to take away from that. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jenica and just appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Megan. That answered a lot of the questions. I'm sure some people have some more too. I know you talked a little bit about how it can affect state and local, but I'm hoping that Kit and Diana can help fill in some of those more specifically too. So right now, if Kit, did you have any input on how it would affect specifically at the state level?
Yeah, I would love to weigh in on that. First of all, I'm really happy that Megan's on this panel, having the long experience that she has along with me and working on this issue in the state. The Equality Act, a question that you often hear, and Megan referred to this, is, with Bostock finding that civil rights, are extended to LGBTQ people, and that it is in fact illegal to discriminate against LGBTQ people. And that's also, been that is the position of the Biden administration and all of the various departments, such as Health and Human Services and the Department of Education and the Department of Justice. Then why do we need the Equality Act? And the answer is really simple. Right now, that equality rests on a Supreme Court decision, which is nowhere near as strong as federal law and is far easier over time to overturn, and we know there's a lot of forces working to overturn that. And that leads us to a place like Indiana, where with no state law, with no surety that LGBTQ people cannot be discriminated against, that leaves us open to sort of the winds of change. An actual, the Civil Rights Act has stood the test of time. It's been around since 1964, and having that that surety just being added to that would really guarantee stability in terms of like who has rights and who doesn't, excuse me. And in Indiana, we have a long history of being very patchwork in our approach to this. Many cities, such as South Bend, have municipal ordinances that outlaw certain forms of discrimination. The problem with that is one, you can go from one city to the other and have different rights. Another is that throughout Indiana, those ordinances vary in their enforceability. And vary in terms of the redress that people can seek when they're discriminated against. The 1964 Civil Rights Act is very clear. There's an enforcement mechanism. It's again been, it's been around for long enough that businesses can be sure that it's not going to result in, what we often hear is going to happen, that there's going to be all these frivolous lawsuits. And we've seen that the Civil Rights Act works as a framework. Hoosiers deserve that. Hoosier LGBTQ people deserve to know that they enjoy those same protections, regardless of where in the state they live, regardless of who their, the political makeup of their city council or their mayor. It also, more importantly to me, I think that we need to see that there are a lot of LGBTQ people for whom seeking redress in this patchwork is difficult. There may be an avenue for someone who lives in Indianapolis. We have a very strong non-discrimination ordinance. There may be an avenue to seek redress if you are, for instance, denied a job or housing. However, that's really complicated. It requires resources that folks don't often have. So bringing the weight of the federal government to simply say, this is illegal, makes a big deal. It's a lot different than having to sort of wade through the bureaucracy of trying to defend yourself against discrimination when you're talking about a population that is largely, poorer than average, has less access to legal services and medical services and employment. The Equality Act would really empower people to know. Finally, another thing that I think that this would affect at the state level is every year in our legislative session, Indiana lawmakers attempt to file an attack bill against LGBTQ people. They take some reforms. So often there's multiple in a year, often targeting our most vulnerable people, particularly trans people, with sort of these frivolous attacks on their rights. Having federal non-discrimination would also provide us with a powerful argument against those forms of discriminatory legislation. I think that when we talk about a population that feels under attack and is under a lot of stress right now because they're being placed sort of at the forefront of the news, I think it's important that they get that surety that their rights can't be taken away with the sort of the sweep of a legislative session. That we have something more permanent in place if Indiana is unwilling, as it has been in the past, to sort of do the right thing by LGBTQ people. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jenica. Thanks for the chance to talk.
Thank you. That was an excellent summary. And yeah, it is something that I do talk about a lot in the diversity trainings that I give. Like, one thing that people that don't often need these protections don't understand is that if you have the means, you can move to a place where you would have certain protections, but it shouldn't be that way, right? Like, we should have these protections no matter where we live, because a lot of times people that need the protections, as you said, are the most vulnerable. They can't move to where they need to be. So that is Thank you for emphasizing that.
And if I could add, sorry to like pop in, another point locally that is important to keep in mind is that while the Supreme Court may have found that discrimination is in fact illegal, which it has, and it is illegal nationwide, that doesn't stop, that doesn't really change sort of the opinions of local lawmakers and elected officials and police officers and employers. And, the Equality Act itself would be such a large, torch that would say, nationally, like, you cannot pretend that this is legal anymore. So that alone is something that's incredibly important in a state like Indiana, where there's so much confusion about discrimination.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, and now we're going to pass it to Diana, who works for the South Bend Human Rights Commission. So she's going to talk about some of these more specific local municipal impacts of the Equality Act. So go ahead, Diana.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Diana Moya. I am the housing manager for the City of South Bend Human Rights Commission, going on 17 years. And of course, it's a continued working environment. Anytime we have additions to our ordinance, and oftentimes, what we hear from the community is that, we didn't know you were here. And I heard, the other two speakers, Megan and Kit, say, sometimes, I apologize, I'm going to paraphrase here very quickly, that perhaps we don't know about what the enforcement is, or patchwork. I like that word because that's actually true. And it's actually frustrating to us as an agency as well, because we are a fair housing assistance program, but we're also a FEPA program, which is the Fair Employment Practice Agency. So our ordinance is substantially equivalent to that of EEOC and HUD's. So we have the right to investigate charges. We retain that jurisdiction based on what the criteria is. But it's frustrating to us as well when folks say to us, you know what, I moved here, but we don't have that even in our city ordinance. Or do I have to move back to South Bend, or even South Bend? What's the enforceability? I heard that, earlier too from one of the other speakers, that, what happens with that? Well, here's the thing. Sometimes people just don't know we're here. And so we as an agency cannot just intermittently go out and say, hey, would you like to file a charge? Because, this is what has happened to you. So I think you should file a charge. And so it's upon us as an agency to get out and educate what we do, what the criteria is. It's important to get that out. And of course, I'm not ignoring the bigger component about the decision, for the Bostock case, only because when that occurred earlier this year, immediately we had a reaction from HUD in that they said, if your city ordinance has, and I'm gonna read it to you, so please excuse me if I read directly from this. It said that the Bostock versus Clayton County said that the Supreme Court held that Title VII's prohibition on discrimination because of sex covers discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. So immediately HUD said, hey, if your city ordinance has that, then guess what? We're going to go ahead. We want to amend our MOU with you. And so now you can start to dual file these charges, which when we dual file with our federal partners. And so, and again, because there really is, again, that confusion, does the state of Indiana have even that particular protection? Does it, doesn't it? It doesn't, right? So, but at least we share the opportunity to be able to file with our federal partners in that, yes, we can still investigate this charge, whether it's employment or housing, because primarily that's where we see the bigger issues. Yes, there are issues in public accommodation and education components, but we don't often see those charges. And again, I think it's because we need to do a better job of getting out to share, hey, this is what we do, this is where we are. And I have a colleague of mine who I was hoping she would join us, but I'm not sure what's going on. We've had trouble with our computers all day today, but I know that she says, oftentimes people don't know us until they need us. And that's the truth. Sometimes people don't know us until they need us. They don't know about us. And we can only do so much. I mean, we can get it on the radio, do commercials, do trainings. Jenica and I did a training last week, as a matter of fact, for the city of Mishawaka, and that was a great opportunity to get out there and share our information as well. And which, in my opinion, even if there's one person sitting in that audience, guess what? That one person walks away with that information and they get to share it forward, which is extremely important. So we enforce the laws. We don't make them up. We just enforce them. That's what we do. We're a neutral agency. And I'm just going to take a little shift here in that, because the other two speakers did a wonderful job speaking about what we're doing today. I'm just going to share that the South Bend Human Rights Commission has jurisdiction over City of South Bend Human Rights Commission, but we have an interlocal agreement with the St. Joe County, which means that we also have jurisdiction over St. Joe County. And so what's exciting about that is that gives us a bigger opportunity and a better opportunity to serve our community. And that's what we want to do. So if you know of anyone, please send them our way. If they're not within the South Bend area or St. Joe County, guess what? We're still going to be able to refer them on to an agency that we know will be able to assist them, or refer them directly to our partner agencies. I always get excited when I'm talking about the federal government and as far as our federal partners, because I know they do good work. But it also takes someone to come forward and be that person that's going to file the charge, especially if there's, the discriminatory component, the issue where they've been harassed. Oftentimes people think, oh, well, it's harassment, but it's not discrimination. Well, it may be. Let us, work with you to find out exactly what's occurred, what's happening, and how you can best file a charge. And again, there's time limits to everything. And so we encourage folks to please contact us as soon as something occurs. Sometimes people don't know, well, I don't know, I don't have a comparative, I don't have this, that's okay. Call us anyway, because we are able to work through that process with you as well, especially in housing, which, has all these issues with the pandemic going on, and already has, the sexual harassment component, happening even before that, when the campaign hit prior to the pandemic, about sexual harassment, even just within, public housing and Section 8, housing, et cetera, that type of thing. So again, we have so much going on in housing, but it doesn't mean that you should not be able to live in your home and enjoy your home and be in peace in your home, free of harassment, free of discrimination, free of a difference in terms and conditions of your housing lease, or whatever the case may be, or that you're going to get charged more because that person isn't, and they hold against you because of your sexual orientation or gender identity or national origin. And sometimes those are coupled together. It's not just sexual orientation or gender identity. Sometimes it's race and sexual orientation or we go down the line: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, big one. And so again, sometimes, oh, well, I only have this issue, but maybe they only cover this. No, again, the whole point is to give us a call so that we can assist you. And the best way to get a hold of us is by calling the commission and just asking to speak to someone who can screen you. We're a very small staff, so oftentimes I'll be answering the phone, or it'll be the other employment manager, or whoever's around the phone that can answer it at that time. We try to get to it right away. But and I'm just going to verbally give the phone number. The phone number to the commission is 574-235-9355. Again, that's 574-235-9355. Of course, we have these wonderful web pages on the City of South Bend site that's specific to human rights, and it's chock full of information, and it will take you through the process of exactly what we do, what our enforcement areas are, what our city ordinance looks like, what our rules and regs looks like, what our commissioners look like as far as, specifically what they do. And we do have information in there about, coming forward and filing a charge if you need to, and then contacting the office, of course, and that has our email as well. So there's always that contact information available. And of course, we're always available for trainings, which we have been doing. We did, many seminars last year because of the whole COVID situation, and of course this year as well. And I apologize, I'm going so quickly, but because I know we want to get into some type of panel discussion, and so I apologize. But that is my brief sharing of information currently about the Human Rights Commission. So I thank you.
Don't apologize. That's good information to know. So thank you. Yeah. So we're gonna move into the question and answer portion now. So again, HR, the director of the LGBTQ Center, is going to be monitoring our Facebook page during this and letting us know if there's any questions there. So if anybody watching has questions, just type them in. But I do have a couple of questions that we got ahead of time, just as we're waiting for questions to come in. So anybody on the panel, if you want to answer these, just feel free. So the first one I have is, what are the key points that employers should know about the current version of the Equality Act? Is there anything specific to employers, like that they would have to change what they're doing and that sort of thing?
I mean, they shouldn't have to change anything if they're not discriminating against people. So that's what I would say to folks. Don't discriminate and there's not a problem. And if you have discriminatory policies, then you should fix those, whether there's an Equality Act or not. I don't know if anybody else has a more direct answer than that.
That was quite direct.
Well, sorry, maybe a less direct answer than that. Stop it.
No, that's a, you know, coming from a place of a situation where we often investigate in employment situations, that's the same thing too. Well, what shouldn't I do? Well, what are you doing? That's going to be a problem.
Like second and third that, but I think a thing that I think that questions about civil rights law can cause employers a lot of anxiety, because they often, especially if it comes to an unfamiliar minority group, such as LGBTQ people, where they might feel like there are a lot of unknowns and they don't know what discrimination in their house looks like. But that is still, I mean, don't discriminate is still the right answer. I think that what employers should know is that that there are ways to learn what that looks like. Lots of people here can talk about what employment discrimination for LGBTQ people looks like. You know, the ACLU is ready. You can contact us through our website at the aclu-in.org, aclu-in.org. And we'll be happy to talk to you about that. We'll be happy to talk to your employees or your management team to educate you on like what the specific concerns for discrimination for LGBTQ people is. But broad ones that I would love to point out that come up over and over again would be discriminatory dress codes, for example. One thing that you know, in fact, was the core of one of the Bostock cases. You simply can't tell people that they have to wear the clothes of a certain gender. You can't tell women that they have to wear pants. You can't tell trans women of any, you know, you can't, that we have to wear pants or dresses. You can't tell, you know, a cisgender man that he can't wear a skirt. This is challenging for some workplaces. But is that at the core of what we mean when we say that Bostock finding found that sex discrimination and gender identity discrimination were the same thing. So dress codes would, you know, making sure that those dress codes, you can still have them, but they need to be gender neutral, professional dress codes. I would also talk about, you know, there's a lot of anxiety over the bathroom issue. Bathroom access would definitely be covered under the Equality Act, and most places that have trans affirming bathroom rules, we have not seen widespread problems with that. We've not seen legal problems, and so if that's something that companies are worried about, this is largely a non-issue when they are implemented. And I could go on about what discrimination looks like, but I would say that there are easy ways to educate yourself, and there's some real basics. And like one really important bit of advice for people grappling with that is think about think about talking to your employees about what discrimination looks like. Think about being open to understanding and learning. You know, when we implemented the Civil Rights Act in the first place, it took us a while to understand what racial discrimination looks like. We're still grappling with that. But that doesn't mean that it's not important work and that your workplace won't be made better by doing that work.
Yeah, that's great answers, everyone. Thank you. Yes. And so when we're talking about businesses, I know that Megan, you mentioned briefly the number of businesses that signed on to this, but how has the business community support for this law changed since earlier versions of the bill were introduced, or has it?
You know, I'm not sure it changed much since it was introduced last year. I think, you know, or the year before. I think really what's changed is the congressional makeup and who's sitting in Congress, and that's why we're seeing a little bit more traction now. But you know, but compared to where the business community was maybe 10 years ago, there's a big difference. I feel like employers know that, you know, it's good business to make sure that your employees are protected and feel safe. You know, when you have companies that work across multiple states, they are also dealing with a patchwork system of how do we structure, you know, our business and how do we treat our employees, but also, you know, how do we make sure that our employees feel comfortable, you know, where they're going to live in these different headquarters and locations. So, you know, and I do think that there's been a feeling in the business community that, you know, this is the right thing to do, and it does actually directly impact our businesses. So, so we're going to take a stand. And I think it's been incredibly helpful in other fights, and I think it will be helpful in this fight.
And I would just like to toss a factoid in. Indiana is currently ranked 41st in the number of in the states where businesses are likely to move to, and our low rankings in diversity are given as a major reason for that by businesses. So this is clearly something that's important for everyone's growth.
Mm-hmm.
And just to echo that, it's also something that we saw. I think most of us who are on this call will remember the RFRA debacle. And it's something that still sticks in people's minds. And in a state like Indiana, with you know, Indianapolis being a huge convention center location, you know, all of the amateur sports that we have that groups are consistently trying to bring to the state, it was not a good look. People were not excited to travel here. And that is kind of a stigma that's a little bit still around, where we're still trying to bounce back from that. So it's also really important for our reputation as a state to get this handled, so that folks know that, you know, you can visit Indiana and be free from discrimination.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yes, I do remember RFRA. We were actually planning a move to the state when that happened. So I mean, we couldn't do anything about it. We had to accept the job that we were offered. So we're here now. But yeah, it's definitely something that that we remember, and definitely something like the Equality Act is gonna prevent certain states from doing that. This might be a loaded question, this next question. It seems a very simple question, but I doubt it's going to be. What are the chances of the Equality Acts passing both chambers?
Well, it's passed one, so we're halfway there. And you know, I do think there's potential. Again, we've seen you know, some bipartisan work happening on infrastructure and discussions on other issues. I do think it's possible. You know, there are Republicans who have been supportive of this bill in the past and in the Senate, and I think that we can hopefully count on them to be supportive. But it is a heavy lift, and that's, you know, that's why we need folks talking to your senators, lighting the phones up, talking to your friends, and getting them to do the same thing, because you know, they do need to hear from us that this is important, and that that Hoosiers care about this very deeply. but I mean, I do think it's possible. And the other thing I would say is, and something I've cautioned a lot of people, this is something that might have a few ups and downs, right? So if something bad happens, or there's a bad article or something like that, you know, or we don't, you know, reach the cloture to get it to the floor the first time, that doesn't mean the battle's over. So stick with it. Don't get too discouraged. Sometimes it takes two swings to get something done. So that would be my comment.
Yeah, thank you. Did anyone else want to weigh in? That was a perfect answer. I think it made a lot of sense. This next question might be a little trickier. So, do any of you have any advice on how we can personalize the issues addressed in the Equality Act for people who only view them as political issues? So I think a lot of times people see this as just, it's a political battle, and a lot of times people who don't feel that they have a personal stake in it don't realize that they have a personal stake in it, if that makes sense. How can we help draw in people that feel like this doesn't have anything to do with them?
Well, storytelling, empowering our LGBTQ people, particularly those who have experienced discrimination, is really powerful. And you know, some of the stories that we've heard, you know, I don't understand often how you can hear some of these stories and not be moved by them. But that is clearly in LGBTQ politics over the past, I don't know, it's really since marriage, the power of people coming forward and telling, you know, their personal story has been a major driver in the way that public opinion has shifted on this issue. You know, Megan references something like 76% of Americans favor LGBTQ equality in some ways. So what we have to do now is communicate the urgency of that, and that's a job that that we all have to take on. And that if that's, you know, if that's something you're called to do, get out there and tell your story. Contact the folks who are great people like Megan who are working on this issue, or find your local LGBTQ group like the LGBTQ Center here in South Bend. Your story is important, even if it's something as simple as a Facebook post. If you're a parent or a supportive employer who wants to speak out about it, that's terribly important too. People need to see that people like them. You know, people who they perceive as like them feel like this is an important issue. The story that really moves me, that comes to my mind whenever people ask this, is ironically, because we're talking about, we spoke about Bostock. I think about Amy Stevens, the client in Bostock, who was fired from her job when she came out as a trans woman, and you know, in the end successfully sued, but did not live to see the results of that lawsuit. She was incredibly brave in a very conservative industry, in a very conservative part of the country, came out and fought until her last breath to make that happen. And I think that, you know, seeing how important that is, that we're talking about our livelihoods, our housing, whether or not we're literally on the street, I think that's important. This isn't just a political football. There are real faces and real people behind this issue.
I would just like to say that, you know, oftentimes when we talk about situations, it's just a generalized, say, for example, like an eviction. It's just, or, you know, these are the evictions, but behind those evictions is a person with a family, sometimes single, sometimes not single. But the point is that it's about human equity. You know, you're going beyond just the, you know, what you're talking about, their cultural background, et cetera, that type of thing. We're talking about human equity. We're talking about a human being. I hate the word buy-in because it almost feels like I'm having to work to make you believe or think or to buy what, you know, what I'm trying to share with you, but it goes beyond that. You know, I prefer using human equity. I prefer using the fact that, you know, when you start to treat people differently, because they, you know, may say, for example, you know, I'm Latina or this type of thing or whatever, you're already making a difference of how you plan to treat or how you're going to treat that person, because all your mind is wrapped around is what they just shared with you. Oh, you know, I'm Latina. And so, you know, if we can get beyond that and look at the human being, look at the need, look at how we can help, I think that's where I would hope to think that people would say, oh, you know what, you know, I'm human equity too in this. You know, this is where we can, you know, work with each other and bring something forward like this, you know, the Equality Act. And I just wish people would just be a little bit more open-minded to what's happening. We've already got so many things going on, but this would just be so much more beneficial, you know, to us as a society. It's my answer.
Thank you.
And just the last thing I'll add there too is when you're talking to people, you know, again, like Kit said, like, is there anything more personal than being able to live your life and have a job and where you live and who you love? Like, there's nothing more personal than that. But what we need to do is share our stories so that other people can understand it. I mean, again, not to go back to RFRA too much, but people were not angry just that like this law passed and like, oh, it shouldn't have passed. Like, they were infuriated by the idea that the LGBT community could be treated so unfairly. And I think because more people know people in the community now, and if they think about it from like, what if this was me or my child or something, it just connects with people in a different way. And, you know, despite the fact that there was a RFRA fix, it didn't fix the issue, right? People all over this state can still be fired because of who they are. And I think when we remind people of that, especially in Indiana, there is kind of this sense of, oh yeah, they didn't fix this and we need to. So like, we know people care about it. We know they got angry. We just have to remind them like, that didn't get fixed. This is how we actually fix it, not that thing that they did. So that's the thing I'd throw in there.
Right.
Yeah,
Still very blatant. Still very blatant.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, I have come to the end of our questions that we had ahead of time. And again, HR is just going to update me if we get any on our live feed. But as we're waiting these last, we just have like a few minutes left. So as we're waiting to see if any more questions come in, I do want to mention a couple of action items that we can do through the center. First of all, as I think everyone in this call has mentioned, telling your story. You can call or email the center, come in during our open hours, and see if you have a short story to share. We can help get you to write an op-ed. We can get you help you get in contact with your senators, Young or Braun. And then also we are having a postcard writing event that's going to be coming up. It's going to be on Thursday, September 9th at the Hammer and Quill. And it's going to be from 5 to 7. There's going to be some drinks if you're interested in that. And we're going to have some postcards that you can write. There are some postcards that are already pre-written with a message. You can just put your name on it so the senator knows you are a constituent. And we'll have some blank postcards if you did want to share your story. And then no postage needed. We're going to collect them, and at a specified date, we'll determine ahead of time. We're going to hand deliver those to the senator's offices, and that will be outdoor on the patio too. So we want to be COVID safe. So we'll be doing that again. That's 5 to 7, September 9th, at the Hammer and Quill. So please feel free to come to that. And the Hammer and Quill is generously offered to keep a stack of postcards on their bar until the date that we are going to be bringing them in. So if you can't make it to that event, you can still head there or to the LGBTQ Center to get a postcard that can be delivered with that. So I don't see any more questions coming in. So if any of the panelists had any final words to say before we let everybody get on to the rest of their evenings.
Just appreciate all your work on this, and appreciate everybody that that helps you out with your postcard party. Make sure you guys go.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to you guys for your participation in this panel. It was very, very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciated hearing from Kit, Megan, and Jenica. I worked with you last week, so that was, very. It was a good learning moment and experience. But thank you so much for sharing your stories and your information today. I appreciated that, and I can carry that forward with our commission as well.
And Jenica and HR and the LGBTQ Center, I appreciate all that you do. And thanks for always being such a great partner and in this work. And I guess my final words would be to folks in South Bend, no matter what happens with the Equality Act, freedom is not just a law, it's mutual support and taking care of one another. And organizations, local organizations like the LGBTQ Center of South Bend are absolutely key to that. So make sure you support your local LGBTQ center.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you all so much, and have a good evening.